The next thing I have today, after that big info dump of a lot of things, is some how-to activities that you can do to think about like how your child is functioning at school and things like that. So the first activity I have is to think of how your student is functioning at home and what accommodations could be helpful for them at home and how those could apply to school. For example, when you're talking to your child, if they need additional time processing like chores they might need to do, or like they need rules told to them like several times before they're able to listen, that's something that can be on an IEP. If a student needs like lots of redirection and you notice at home that they're needing lots of redirection, that's something that can be included in an IEP. So think of how your student is functioning when you see them and think of how that can be applying to maybe when you're not seeing them at school. The next activity I have is to think about like what's working well for your student and what isn't. So like within that, how is your student functioning at home? Like if you're noticing that they're starting to improve a lot in like reading and that was one of their goals, or maybe they're starting to fall behind in math and that was one of their goals and they have accommodations to help them with math, and then they're not, then that's something that you need to notice. So think of like how your student is performing and whether that's meeting their goals and what isn't. And if it turns out the accommodations that they're receiving are not working, then that's something that you need to know, and you can call another meeting. It doesn't have to only be annually, it can be as often as you need. Parents can call an IEP meeting and talk to special education teachers or anything like that and make sure that the student's goals are being met and everything is working for the student, because the goal isn't that it's working for the school and it's easy for the school. The goal isn't necessarily even that it's working for you as a parent. The goal is that it's working for the student and their education. So think about how the IEP is working to serve like your student or maybe their 504 plan or other accommodations that they're receiving. The last activity that I have is just to think like within thinking if your student is meeting their goals, similar to the last activity, is there a reason that they have or haven't? So when the student is coming back from school, if they're verbal, are they telling you things like, oh, I was supposed to be on my own and just with my aide, and I was forced to work in a group, or I'm supposed to be closer to the board and I was seated way far back in the room? Are they telling you things like that? And that could be a reason that they're not meeting their goals. If they aren't, and if they aren't verbal and they have a communication device, that's something that you can look at. A lot of devices will have like logs that you can see a history of what was said, so you can look at what they were saying at school. Maybe they needed a drink of water and they weren't able to go get one because they weren't able to verbalize that, and that distracted them, so they weren't able to do it. But think of it of not only is your student meeting their goals and what is working for them, but is there a reason that could be happening? And that sometimes isn't a connection that your child is able to make. They might not realize like the cause and effect of like, oh, this happened at school and then I wasn't meeting my goals. But as parents, it's necessary that we're taking all of the information available to us from the school, from the IEP, from the parents, and or from the student, and looking at grades and how does that form the bigger picture of like what's going on with the child's education. So I would also think about that. And when doing all of these, it's nice to like make a list, and then if anything isn't happening, just write up an email. Write an email to like an administrator, to your child's like special education teacher or general education teacher or both, and make sure that this is being communicated and it isn't something that you're just waiting it out to see what's happening, because it's important that students are receiving the services they need as soon as possible and time is not being lost to just leave things to time and chance.